you know, first of all, Don is the last known charter member of the NBC, and that's pretty important. But also, so Don is probably first a teacher. He's a retired professor from the University of Maryland, Department of Entomology. He has taught entomology and ornithology for more than 60 years at the University of Maryland and also at ANS. And he's continuing to give talks, not necessarily formal education, but he still introduces birds and insects to many in the community. He has also practiced research. And of course, he worked on specific insects in different parts of the world, including Australia. But I was, I went to the web and looked, searched what I would see about him.
Apparently, if I don't have my video, it says Maddie Ross.
Hello, yes.
Oh.
Sorry, can you now? Yeah, okay. What I found is that he succeeded in a field where very few of us, I think, have succeeded, and he actually resolved the problem of practical importance and practical relevance to the city of Washington, D.C. And I had never heard about this. And the problem was the degradation of the Lincoln and Jefferson memorials in the early 1990s. Actually, in 1990, there were signs of degradations of the monuments, and they were thought to result from their frequent cleaning. Actually, in the May 1990, a block of marble fell down from the Jefferson Memorial. Fortunately, no one was hurt or killed, but nevertheless, the authorities noticed that it was time to do something about it. And they asked Don to serve as a consultant because birds were thought to be involved in the defacing, let's say, of the monuments and the need for their frequent cleaning. So Don actually worked for quite a while on this, and he produced a very long report, but which was not published. But the results have been, are mentioned in a very interesting site on the web. And Don found out that things were not exactly as presented, and he can later tell me if I'm wrong in this. But anyway, he asked why the need for the frequent cleaning. There were bird droppings, but why were the birds on the monuments? And he found out that this was because there were many spiders. Why many spiders? Because there were swarms of midges, small insects. And why these midges? Actually, because of the monument lighting. So in the end, the problem was not so much a problem of birds, but it was the problem of the lighting of the monuments. So then Don proposed and tested a very easy, inexpensive solution. And that was to just change the time at which the light was turned on, to change it from an hour, I think, before sunset to an hour after sunset. And he tested, there was an ingenious way of testing by alternating the time of starting the lights on different days. And indeed, that solution worked very well. On days when the lights were turned on later, there were no midges, no spiders, and I suppose fewer, or at least very much fewer, but kind of close to 90% fewer, and that was a great solution. Unfortunately, and that can give us something to think about, that solution was not adopted permanently, and it was stopped after a short time because photographers complained that when the monuments were not lit up, they could not have the best view of the lit up monuments together with the sunset. And what they had to do to reduce the problems of the water that was actually damaging the monuments during the cleaning was much more complicated and expensive than what Don had proposed. But that's what happened. Okay, so let's continue.
The last part of that is we found a new kind of light bulb. We actually had Westinghouse and GE found a light bulb that had wavelengths that did not attract the midges so much.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, so all the lights down there are changed now.
Okay, that's great. Don is also interested in history, and he's written a history of birding in Montgomery County, which is actually on the website, and which is very, very useful. And more recently, he's published something that's not, that can be called really history, but I think that he will show us this book that he's written later. Will you, Don, the book that you showed me about your trip of a few months in some states?
Yeah, that was around the country birding trip.
Okay, so we can talk about this later. He has led and organized innumerable bird tours with his own company that was called World Nature Tours, and with other organizations such as the Crowder Nature Tours, ANS, the American Birding Association, Internal Expeditions, and others. He has gone to every continent. He has, I think that if I remember I remember watching your presentation on traveling to China. I think that you were the first one to take birders to China, if I'm not mistaken.
I was on the first trip, yeah, and I took the first American birders.
Yeah, okay. He went to 117 foreign countries, and in North America to 8 Canadian provinces and 50 US states, including Alaska and Hawaii. He's also a staunch supporter of global conservation through the Crowder Messersmith Fund, which honors Orville Crowder and Don and Sherry Messersmith. Sherry was Don's wife. The fund, which is managed by ANS, gives grants to small local conservation and education organizations in different countries of the world. And there's been more than 150 grants given to, I think, more than 55, if I find my notes here, yes, countries. Finally, Don has received many awards, including, I will only mention 2, be reassured, the Chandler Robbins Distinguished Teaching Award from the American Birding Association, and I'm sure most important, he has received in 2008 an award as quote unquote birding treasure from the Montgomery Bird Club. So I think that we're in for a treat, and it's a high time I stopped talking and let's now let Don speak. Don, your turn. Speak. Don, your turn.
Thank you, Evelyn. Unfortunately, I can only show you one bird picture now because she's taking all my time.
Actually, it's 8 p.m. Good time.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, well, thank you for all that. It's probably not necessary, but I appreciate it. She said, you know, I've done a lot of traveling, but Cuba was closed. It's only 90 miles from Key West, and yet because of the communist government and it's the American embargo on Cuba, we couldn't go there. But sometime in the 70s, when we were still running World Nature Tours, I heard about a fishing company that could go there, and I contacted them, and to make a long story short, we sent a birding trip with the fishing group, and that was the last of that. After that, it closed down completely until It opened up a little bit with some chartered flights from Miami, and for a number of years, not a lot of people have been able to go to Cuba. And I spoke to Mark Garland that, I've been a lot of places, but I'd really like to go to Cuba. And so ANS and Mark organized this trip to Cuba. And that's what I'm about to show you. It was just about, when I looked at my dates, that was just right now. But such a long time ago, 9-10 years ago. To go to Cuba, you have to have special permission, but there was an American who had worked with the government and worked out all the details, but briefly, we had to have a visa, which cost $50. We had to put in a little biography to show that we really knew about birds. And a health form and an insurance form and all of that. But it was all taken care of finally. It took about 6 months, but we organized it. And it was not a bird watching trip. They're not permitted. A bird survey trip, however, was permitted. That's why they wanted to know what kind of background we all had. Well, everybody in the group had enough of a background to satisfy them. And a lot of preparation. You can see this. It's the book of birds and details, and I can't do it right, of everything that they gave us for preparation. There is a field guide to the birds of Cuba, a good one, by this Orlando Garrido, which you'll meet shortly. And, it's got the typical field guide approach. In this 1970 trip, I didn't go, but one of our leaders did. And he met this Orlando Garrido, and they had a book called Catalog of the Birds of Cuba. And it was the only book available at that time for Americans. And he had Garrido autograph it. I can't do this right, which was nice. So when I went back on this trip, we met Arturo Garrido, and I had him autograph it again, the same book, which pleased him very much that we had done that. There is some good literature. This was about the natural history of Cuba in English. Good book.
Everyone mute themselves.
Yeah, I'm muting everyone.
Okay.
Okay.
One of the parts of the embargo, the American embargo, is that you cannot buy and bring in anything from Cuba, souvenirs or anything. Like I bought a sun hat for $1 or so, but I had to leave it. Unless it's art or good literature. So the only art that I brought out was postage stamps, which I happen to collect. And they are all bird postage stamps. So anyway, that's kind of the background. So let's go to Cuba. We started in Havana. I don't know if you can see my, can you see it if I can find it? We started in Havana and had 3 days there just to sightsee. No restrictions, wandering around wherever we wanted to in the city. We had a guide, but I mean, we had free time, which I took advantage of, and I'll show you. I keep losing my. And then we headed out west on this reasonably good highway, way down here to the point. Later, we were to come back and go to Havana and then head back to the east. But we didn't go very far east. We went out this way to some keys, which of course I'll show you. Guantanamo is way down here at the end. This area is all forested. And the last ivory-billed woodpecker in Cuba was seen here in the 1980s, 1985, by an ornithologist from New York Academy of Science. He saw 2 of them. And so the Cuban government set aside a huge forested area here and protected it. No cutting of forests or anything. And our guide, who was one of their, not Garrido, but another a man from the museum, said that he went and and others spent 3 months in this area looking for the ivory-billed woodpecker and did not find it. So it's presumed that even in Cuba, the ivory-billed gone. And of course, Guantanamo, you'll hear about in the newspaper every once in a while. There's the prison down here. All right. The Cuban flag interested me because it's the same Cuban flag that they had before communism. And that part didn't change. The National Hotel is where we stayed. It's probably the finest hotel in Cuba. It was where many famous people stayed and still stay in Havana. It was built in 1930. Has a nice lobby. Incidentally, I mailed a letter here in the lobby and to my wife, to Sherry, and it didn't come. And finally, 2 months after our letter arrived, and it had not been stamped, it had not gone through, somebody had carried it out of Cuba. In a side hallway, they have the Hall of Fame, and I'll just briefly mention who's been there. Anyway, here's Johnny Weissmuller, and let me see who else.
Errol Flynn.
Errol Flynn up here, Rita Hayworth.
Buster Keaton.
Buster Keaton. Gary Cooper.
Wow.
And so on. So that was the 1930s. Those people went. And in the 1940s, we got Winston Churchill. What's his name? The dancer.
Fred Astaire.
Fred Astaire and Rita Hayworth again. And let me see, I had them all, I practiced a little while ago. Aga Khan, Mickey Mantle. And well, anyway, I thought I had them all. Anyway, so you get the idea. 1950s, Rocky Marciano, Nat King Cole, Frank Sinatra, Ava Gardner. Oh, here's Mickey Mantle here. Marlon Brando. That's a Spanish somebody. Walt Disney and Mickey Mouse. Pablo Casal, and so on. So all these famous people stayed there. And there was more for the 1960s, and then it ended because then they had the revolution. But for the 20,000th, they've got a back closet where it says Don Messersmith was here, but that's not put up yet. Anyway, don't believe that. In the hallway, they have these nice paintings by local artists. of course, Cuban scenes. Then downstairs was the dining room. Now this is, supposedly a communist country, but boy, they're ready for tourists. But most of the tourists are coming from Europe, especially Spain. So here's some hors d'oeuvres and some little sushis, all kinds of tropical fruits and watermelons. More tropical fruits, particularly papaya, which I really like, and pineapple. Different kinds of poultry. And of course, this is all buffet, so you can help yourself to anything you want. Fantastic desserts and a special cake, greeting cake. So after a good meal, we went outside from the hotel. The hotel is built on not exactly a hill, but a high point, and there was once a fort there. And it's hard to see, but right in the middle here is a cannon left over from that time. And that's the view out of the Caribbean. And then the other view from the hotel, you walk out and they have these tables. And our guide told us that Winston Churchill sat at one of these tables and growled and grumped the whole time he was there. Anyway, and they had this peacock. Really a great peacock. You notice it's reading the things that are on the plat here. So it's reading the things on the plaque. No. And of course the cars. We'll talk more about this. Now, I put this in because Dennis Spriggs on our trip took a lot of photographs, and they're excellent photographs. And most of the bird pictures you see will be by Dennis Spriggs. A couple toward the end are mine, but he had excellent cameras and everything. So anyway, our first excursion was to Dr. Orlando Garrido's house, the man that wrote the field guide, the leading ornithologist in Cuba. Very friendly, good English. And he was showing us on his table all of the endemic species of birds of Cuba, stuffed birds, of course, and then was happily signing our books. So that was our and he, told us a lot about the birds and so on while we were there. And you can see a whole bunch of birds there. And as we get into the talk, you'll actually see these birds in the wild. And from this kind of thing. So I didn't photograph any of them. Now we're beginning some sightseeing in Havana. Of course, Che Guevara is one of their heroes of the revolution. But we wandered, as I said, through the streets of Havana. Some of it is not in good shape, and I'll show you others that is. Ernest Hemingway loved Cuba, wrote a lot about it, stayed there a lot, and this is where he stayed. They have a plaque at this particular hotel. But just wandering the streets, you see interesting little signs, some kind of soap. And of course, Simon Bolivar, a very famous liberator of many countries in South America, not necessarily Cuba, but he visited Cuba back in 1799 and stayed in this building. Morro Castle was built by the Spanish in the 1600s. It's now basically a museum, which we did not visit. The Capitol building is designed after our own Capitol building, because of course America was the colonial ruler of Cuba after the Spanish-American War. We drove out the Spanish and then we took over until the revolution. And they have a big national theater and one of the main squares, a very nice bus terminal. And this is from St. Francis of Assisi, the plaza, and there's a statue of St. Francis of Assisi. In our modern computers, they'll pick up, if you have a app for that, the pictures of people that you photograph. Well, on mine, I've got all the people I know, my family, my daughters and others, including St. Francis of Assisi. The computer picked him up as an individual. So back in the old colonial days, water is a problem there, surprisingly. And so the Spanish built this aqueduct, which is no longer used, of course. So now they have to bring in their water by truck every day, I suppose. And they're ready for tourists, and there were a lot of tourists there. Not American particularly. We ran into one American college group, and that was all. And so we're wandering the streets of Havana. And an old church. We didn't take time to go in, but anyway, from the 1600s, a lot of tourists, including a school group that wanted their picture taken in front of the old church. And we'd walk down the street and then peek into these archways, into these private courtyards. A lot of very pretty vegetation in these this is downtown Cuba. Havana, downtown Havana, and even a lizard on one of the walls. And bougainvillea is almost everywhere. Now the Plaza Vieja has been modernized by a Spanish firm, and so the buildings are all in good shape, and there are restaurants and hotels and shops and that sort of thing around this formerly old plaza, but it's really very modern right now. Outdoor dining and that, all of that. And on a side street, there was a building with these paintings. And this is just a small portion of that wall of citizens back in the 1800s. Finally, time for lunch, and we were directed to this triangular shaped restaurant, which was very nice. And we had entertainment, these dancers who were very vigorous, typical Latin American dancing. You can see they're perspiring on the man's shirt that it was hot, no air conditioning, and they were really very vigorous. Then we did some more sightseeing in the afternoon. Here was a very old clinic from 70s, a Chinese restaurant. This is interesting. It's called Neighborhood Watch. Now, our guide said that every block or so has this neighborhood watch to help the people. In other words, if somebody has sickness or financial problems, this, in this case, Manuel Zaballo, would help them. But what he didn't say is, this is a communist country, and these people are also watching their neighbors that are, make sure they're behaving correctly according to the government's standards. He didn't say that, I just made that up, but I think that's what they are. Stations of the Cross, because a month after we were there, the Pope was going to come to visit for the first time in many, many years. And so they were fixing up a street for the Stations of the Cross for the Pope's visit. You know, you can see the people, they're fairly well dressed. And they're very well dressed, as a matter of fact. Clean, everything was clean. Food was good everywhere. People were extremely friendly, happy to see Americans. And we just couldn't have a better welcome. Another courtyard as we're walking down the street. And then we went out to this big plaza on the edge of the city where the statue of Jose Martin is their real liberator. He formed a group of people in the 1890s to get the country free from the Spanish. well, they failed at that time, but they call him the liberator, and he's still their national hero before Castro came along, of course. Just as a point on that, everywhere we went, we never saw a picture of Castro inside hotels, restaurants, or anything. And I would think it would be just the opposite, because they talk about Castro all the time. And nowadays it's his brother, and his brother recently retired. But I'm not saying that that's a good thing for the communists. I don't have anything good to say about any communist, but it's an interesting thing, unlike, other countries where the leader is pictured everywhere. Okay, we finally get to some birding. First on the outskirts, just stopped at a field and saw some little grass quits and seed finches here, no pictures. And then we headed west to this Maria LaGorda resort. If any of you know Spanish really well, it really is saying Maria the fat one. Gorda is somebody who's fat. Well, it seems that Maria, the original one, not anymore, of course, had a little private business going out way at the end of the peninsula, which wealthy people, men, could go there and be entertained. I'll let you figure that out. But they don't do that anymore. Dinner was on this outdoor place, very nice, very good food at the resort. And of course, it's right on the beach, nice sunsets, sunrise. This always interests me because this is taken in the same direction. The sunrise was facing, the sunset was facing east, and let me start over. The sunset was facing west, and in the sunrise, I'm still facing west. And it looks like the sun is coming up, but what it is, of course, is reflection on the clouds. I thought it was kind of neat. And they had these cabins, quite nice. I didn't get back there very much. Most of the group were staying back there. And there were a lot of North American warblers that the members of the group could see them in the trees and bushes back there, because of course we were February, so the warblers would be wintering there. And again, a lizard. Mark Garland, who many of you don't realize was my student back at the University of Maryland. And basically I got him started in leading birding trips. I got him interested in nature. He took my bird classes, my insect classes. And I'm very proud of Mark, because he's become one of the best known bird tour leaders and nature tour leaders in the world. Well, Mark never said anything much to me about it, but every time we went someplace, I got was essentially the best accommodations. So Mark was being very good to me, his old teacher. And they had the open air dining right next to that. So my cabin was right next to the dining area on the beach. It's a great area for diving. And all these clubs from all over the world have come there. And a very nice beach, good morning shot. They also have these condos for tourists, and some were in use. You can see the cars parked there. And they're hoping for the future, because they're building all these nice new modern condos, hoping that someday Cuba will open up to Americans, which it really should, in my opinion. I can't imagine why we have this embargo against a country that's not much bigger than any of our states. But of course, I think many of you know the reason for that is that there's such a large group of Cubans in Miami that are voters, that they have a lot of influence. So someday we hope it'll open up. Now some good birds. Yes. Endemics. This is a kingbird that looks just like ours, but it's about a third the size, bigger. The orioles, black-cowled orioles, so-called. It has black all over its head. There's the West Indian woodpecker, which is not endemic to Cuba. You see it a lot of places, and obviously fairly closely related to our red-bellied woodpecker. This flicker doesn't look much like our flicker, but it's in the same genus. They call it a green woodpecker, that's really what we would call a flicker. Here's the smallest bird in the world. This was one of our most wanted birds. This little bee hummingbird is the size of a sphinx moth, weighs less than an ounce, and is about 1.5 inches or 1.75 inches in length. Tiny little thing, and fairly common. This was like the first one we saw in photograph. This animal is almost extinct. There were 6 species at one time found only in Cuba. And of course, for the early settlers, they were good to eat. And so there's, I think 1 species is left in a zoo. And this, of course, is a stuffed one. Now we're way down to the end of the peninsula, which I had to learn to pronounce, the Guanahatabibis Peninsula at the very western end of Cuba, where there's a national park. And the park is right at the end of the peninsula. This is the outline of the park. So, a good birding area, all forested and water. And there we saw the other hummingbird that's in Cuba, the only other one, the Cuban, which is of course bigger than the other one, but not much bigger. About the size of our ruby-throated hummingbird. The West Indian whistling duck is possibly the rarest duck in the Caribbean area, and they're known to occur in this lagoon. And so we spent, I don't know, 2 or 3 hours there looking for the whistling duck. And finally, way over on the other side, a flock of about 3 or 4, not even a flock, a group of 3 or 4 came swimming by, and we got to see the West Indian whistling duck, and got a nice photograph off the internet. They were too far away to photograph. So another really rare bird for us. And I don't remember why I got up at 3 a.m. I guess I knew it was going to be full moon and wanted to take a picture. And then the dawn came that same day, and the vultures were getting ready to fly out. These are the same black vultures as here. But then we got some good birding. This Cuban pygmy owl had come out of its nesting hole, and got a shot of that. This, to me, is one of the most fascinating birds in Cuba. Trogons occur all around the tropics. They're called circumtropical. And I've seen many of them in other countries. But it's the tail that fascinates me, this strangely cut out tail. No other trogon has a tail like this. So, very special bird as far as I was concerned. Trogons are always pretty, and I like them very much. They have warblers, related in the same family as our warblers, Perulidae or whatever they're called now. This is another endemic. Stripe-headed tanager. This is one they have trouble classifying, so now they're calling it a Western spindalis, where spindalis is simply its scientific generic name.
They're now in separate family, Don.
Oh, are they?
Spindality. Yeah, they're not a tanager. Spindality, yeah.
What, the Sindalis or tanagers? What do you mean?
No, all the spindalis, I think there's 4 of them, are in a separate family.
Oh, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Cuban parrot. They once had a macaw, a larger one, but it's extinct. So this is a pretty big parrot, sort of normal sized parrot. And another size place at the beach. And sea grapes, which are not really grapes, plants. When I go, I like to photograph sort of everything. Now we're traveling. We've spent our time at the end of the peninsula at La Gorda and heading back toward Havana. We actually didn't go to Havana, but we went through these government-built villages. Had to stop at a gas station, and my guess is that this tractor came down, filled the tank with gas, and then went back up into the hills for the farmers that didn't come to the gas station. And while we were there, more than an hour, and I started photographing people going by. And here's a homemade cart on the left, and motorcycle on the right. In the middle of this, it's hard to see, but there's a woman on a horse and a bicycle, and another bicycle, and another homemade cart. Notice there were no automobiles in these photographs because none went by. They have automobiles, and of course we'll see some, but you just don't see many at all. It's mountainous in western Cuba, and scenes like this are fairly common. We saw another tourist bus and stopped and talked, and we were able to meet this Arturo Kirkconnell, is another important ornithologist in Cuba, and a good friend of Garrido, and when somebody we had heard of in advance. And that evening he ended up at the same lodge that we were at. And so I had a really nice evening conversation with him. And the main part of it was that he said he's writing a new book on the birds of Cuba. So when any of us can go there again, which I probably won't, but anyway, there'll be another field guide from this Kirkconnell man.
Yeah, he stayed with us for 2 weeks in 2002, Don.
He was your guide?
Silver Spring, yeah. Arturo. Yeah. He came up to work on the Smithsonian Cuban bird skins.
Okay. Very good. Yeah. You mean he stayed with you at your house?
Yeah, right.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, we even we took him out to see birds like pileated woodpecker and things like that.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, he's a very nice guy and very good nice ornithologist.
Yeah.
I was impressed that almost all the houses of I presume, the farmers were little things. And we saw a lot of them like this as we, traveled around and take pictures out of the bus window. Tobacco was a big thing, but we were told that they're only raising about 1% of the tobacco that they used to because of the embargo, and which is really hurting their economy. So now we're out in the country and just a nice group of palm trees. A gas station with not much business. Another village. Nice park in the town square. Notice how neat and clean everything is. And finally, we reached this hotel, Mirador, which, interesting to me, was a privately owned hotel. It was not government run. And we're staying in this town called San Diego de los Baños. Very nice hotel. My room. You notice there's a telephone here, and I picked it up and had the right numbers, and I dialed home and talked to Sherry for about 20 minutes, right from Cuba, with a good connection. And yet other things are not so good. But anyway, the telephone worked good. They have internet. You have to pay for half an hour's use on a computer in the hotels and so on. But anyway, pretty good. And the nice garden, as you would expect in tropical country. You notice on my slide, the time is 5:32. Which means rush hour. This is during rush hour. And then we walked toward the dining area, and again, another open air dining area, very nicely arranged and good food. And I don't know, painting just in the garden. This looks almost like a salamander, but it's a lizard, tiny little lizard that we happen to see. And sunset at that place. The next morning was a big day for all of us, and especially me. We got up early and headed up into the mountains and up to the top. By then it was about 9 o'clock in the morning. On the way up, I had seen a tawny-shouldered blackbird. Looks like ours, except that the shoulder is tawny. And that was bird number 3,999 of my life list, because I got my 4,000th life bird right in this tree. You can see the bird hopping around there. See it there? You can't, but it was there. And so there's the olive-capped warbler that got me to my 4,000th life bird. So that was kind of fun, exciting. And it was a pretty area up there, but not much fun. Now we're coming back down again. It's still fairly early in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning. I said 9, it was 8 o'clock. Down in the valley, or down lowland. Then we went to this place, the Cave of the Portales. And for the Cubans, this is one of their historic spots, but it's also now a resort, as you can tell by the nice cabins and the playground and so on. But it was the hideout of Che Guevara during the revolution. And so they were, they wanted us to see that. So we headed toward the hideout cave. And there we are. They said that's where he slept during the revolution. And I built this section. Anyway, I called it the office. I don't know if it was. So for the Cubans, this is an important historic place. But we were more interested in the birds. This rather plain bird right in the middle here, there were 2 of them actually building a nest. Solitaires are in the thrush family. And they're very beautiful singers, like most thrushes are, and found mostly in tropical areas. Then they took us over to this estate, which is all in ruins. Probably somebody that was very important in the Batista, when Batista was dictator, and when they all fled to Havana, to Miami, to Miami, probably somebody came in and blew up the place. Must have been quite a mansion. But the grounds were nice, these old mango trees and birds flitting around. Then we got in the car again and headed out. And while we were driving a fairly long drive, our local guide, very friendly man, showed us their ration cards or ration books. Everything is rationed, or rationed if you want it that way. And so he passed it around just to show what, I mean, very little meat, for instance, more vegetables and stuff. Meat was like, I don't know, a third of a something pound maybe per week. I don't remember the details. Of course, we weren't affected by any of that because we were treated very well. And that night, Mark Garland is such a great guy. He knew I was coming close to this. And another man in the group also got his 4,000th life bird the same time I did, or not the same day, but close to that. And so here was Mark with a card that all the group signed for my 4,000th bird. Next morning, we're out to a special bird refuge, and a local guide was there to help us. Wonderful birds in a place like this. The quite rare Key West quail dove, which once in a while does come to America, but it's very rare. That's a bird bath that the bird is sitting on, a stone carved bird bath somebody put out. And our guide knew where this screech owl was, so we got the screech owl looking out its hole in a tree. Parakeet, smaller than the first one I showed you, and parakeets are, of course, mostly smaller than parrots. Nice shot of the local vireo. And these anis usually are seen in groups like this. They're really related, they're in the cuckoo family, and sort of strange birds. We can see them in Florida, but managed to see a flock of them sitting there on the wires. More farmers' houses. Then we went to the area which has a historical significance both for America and Cuba, because we organized an invasion of Cuba with Cubans, and it failed. But so the monument on the right is a monument to one of the local Cubans who was killed in the Battle of the Bay of Pigs. And there are several of those monuments along the road going up to the museum. And so they had this war museum. I didn't go in, I'm not particularly interested in wartime things, but some of the group went in. And so I stayed outside, and I and the guide went over and bought some ice cream, and then we came back, and this man wanted to earn a little money by showing us his pet caiman. And you know, you give them a couple pesos or something for taking a photograph of the caiman, which was, of course, a kind of crocodile alligator family.
Forgot my program tonight. Forgot about my program tonight. Me too.
Please do not speak, Betsy Taylor.
Don Messersmith on Birds of Cuba. Yeah. So
Mute yourself, please.
it is muted. That's strange. Okay.
And going along, there are a little bit of individual industry permitted by the government. So we had charcoal and banana plantation, somebody's backyard.
Continue not be able to hear us.
I wish they would mute themselves. Anyway, another one of the little cars. And of course, there's a modern car there in the background. American car. The gnat catcher looks very much like our gnat catcher. But this is again one of the most wanted birds. These beautiful little toadies. They're tiny little things, maybe 3 inches long, and all colorful. There are 5 different kinds in the world. They're all in the Caribbean area, and different islands have different ones. Puerto Rico has, I think, 1 or 2, and so on. But anyway, Cuba has 1 of them. And being an entomologist, I was interested in the termite tunnel on a tree. And here came for another resort just for lunch, which again was outdoors. And then siesta. So a few people went swimming here. I took a nap instead. Greater Antillean grackle, a very common bird throughout the Caribbean. And an egret, just like our egret. It is our egret. Now to the next resort, which is the Playa Larga, is the beach where the Bay of Pigs event occurred, but it's now a resort. And we stayed in cabins. Once again, Mark gave me a very nice cabin. Not far from the dining room. And this, so many of you have seen these sorts of things in nice places. You don't see this very often in nice places, though. The Zapata swamp is extremely important in bird circles in Cuba because it has 3 rare endemic, well, 2 of them are pretty rare and 1 is not so rare, birds that live only there. And this was a sort of most wanted place to go to see these unusual birds. So we had the director as our guide while we were there. He knew where everything were, basically where everything was, and took us over to this place where we got a view of the swamp, a fairly extensive swamp in the southern coast. And our goal was to see the Zapata wren. Well, you know, wrens are often hard to see. They scuttle through the underbrush. And sure enough, one popped up and we actually saw the Zapata wren. This photograph is from the internet, but nonetheless, we did see it and we were all very excited about that. And then, and more open and much more common is the Zapata sparrow, found only in that area. The third bird is the Zapata rail. And they know it exists, and this Arturo Garrido, the leading ornithologist, has never seen it, but they know it's there. And the swamp is so big and so hard to get through that basically nobody's seen it, and yet it exists. So we didn't see it. And there are other things to look at. Hermit crab, a land crab. These are kind of big things, about 8 inches across. Kind of pretty thrush with really bright red legs. Not endemic, but it's pretty common in the Caribbean. And some flowers, fungus. Anything that catches my eye, I try to photograph. And we had dinner, again, in a nice outdoor pavilion. And their rooms were all quite nice. There was a swimming pool that we all looked at and nobody had time to go in. We were too busy looking for birds. Went down to the beach. This is where the Bay of Pigs invasion actually took place. Okay, now we're again in the car, in the bus, moving along. The bus was a Chinese-made bus, very comfortable, air conditioning even. Anyway, another car, Chrysler. And it was, well, Valentine's Day, just like here. And they picked up the holiday from America. So We were there Valentine's Day. Lots of refreshments, mostly for tourists, of course. The locals couldn't afford stuff like this. Moving along. Another rest stop. Just like we have the rest stops along the highway, they have them there. Our bus is there on the left. And now we're moving along, Cadillac. We're on the main highway, runs the length of the country, and there's a toll booth, but nobody was collecting tolls. Not enough traffic. Now, we're on a causeway going out to a key, and this is just amazing to see, a bird like this in such abundance. This, of course, was about a third of the ones that were in that little lagoon. And finally, to this really nice resort hotel, called Cayo-Coco. Cayo-Coco was the offshore key that we were now on. Very nice rooms, quite modern, comfortable, nice gardens. All very pretty, well cared for. This was along the driveway. And I was fascinated by this particular flower. I don't know what it is, but it's pretty. Of course, a very nice swimming pool. A fair number of tourists were here, many of them from Spain, but other European countries more than any place else. And the Antillean grackle was there to get a drink. And they had a nice shop, more drinks, and even Nestle's ice cream. Notice you got over here is a Coca-Cola, Heineken beer, Beck's beer. Those are the ones that I was familiar with. Actually, those prices in Cuban money are not too high. And behind the bar, they had a whole series of these carvings. So again, a very nice place. But we were there for birding and headed out. And again, flowers or plants that I'm interested in. Giant milkweed, really big. So tropical species of milkweed. Great lizard cuckoo, kind of a hard to see bird, but we managed to get a good view, and my friend got a good picture of it. Now this is my picture. Finally, I get the birds are relatively tame. I mean, this is a short telephoto lens picture. The bird just sat there, and so did the Cuban peewee that I was able to photograph. And they were good birds to see. Then we headed out sort of to another area called the actual Cayo-Coco area, and stopped at the lagoon to look for ducks, which weren't there. And what we did see an American redstart spending its winter there, and some turtles out in the lagoon. That's about all we saw at that place. Our guide said, if any of you Americans can figure out what this means, let me know. It's in strange English. How do you have a bridge indifference? And of course, what they're trying to say is the bridge was being repaired. And anyway, English is complicated. Now, this is the local guy that was out there. And he was so proud of this Chevrolet Bel Air. He showed everybody it, gave a couple of people a ride in his car, and so on. Keeps it up very nicely. They get their parts from Spain to keep these older cars going. Yeah, we had lunch, but it was a very windy day, so we couldn't do much at the beach. There's flamingos. There you are, the same pictures that you had in the, I forget who it was that had those.
Yeah, Cheryl, yeah.
Yeah, okay, there they are, they're still there. Now we're heading back toward the end of the trip, toward back toward Havana. I don't know why they had this there, but somebody made a carving of a cow. There's a very nice looking motor scooter. And our bus had stopped there for gas, and so give an idea that it was pretty expensive, $3.96 a gallon. That's what it is here now, almost. We took a different route coming back than from what we went out. So as we're traveling west, we went through some sort of out of the way villages just to get a different view of Cuba. And that's a little pedal taxi that somebody had made. So they get around a little bit. Then again, I had a nice cabin that Mark gave me nearest the dining room. And some more folded towels. Many of you remember Pat and Pearl. They were both in good shape on the trip, had a good time, and now they're both gone. I'm sorry to say. Both were good friends and members of the club, or at least A&S. Now we're on the highway, 6-lane highway, and not a car in view. The Russians, of course, were in Cuba for a number of years, and they were the ones that built these roads and improvements, and they started to build this viaduct, and then they got mad at Cubans, or Cubans got mad at them, and it was never finished. And some of us were saying, well, if the embargo could ever be lifted, they could get American engineers in there, hire Cubans, and Cubans would have a job, and so would some Americans, but that's not yet the case. Interesting. This went for more than a mile. Now we're back in Havana, looking at vintage cars, Chevrolet Bel Air on the left, and some little Chrysler. And the license plates are meaningful there. They're green, they're military, red, there's a rental car, but you can rent cars in Cuba. The government car is blue, and a private owned car has a yellow license plate. I think it's kind of a good system. Chinese made traffic signal. The Chinese have really moved into Cuba with all their construction and automobiles and everything. Our final lunch was in this nice outdoor restaurant. Well, always with music. Every restaurant, you would have a small Cuban band playing vigorous Cuban music while you were eating. And driving around somebody's big house from earlier days. I don't know what it is now. More cars. We ended up back at the Hotel Nacional. We were supposed to have reservations, and our guide went in and said, "Don't have reservations," because they were remodeling one whole wing of the hotel where we would have stayed, and we couldn't stay there. And so we sat out in the garden maybe for 2-3 hours, sipping the local, I forgot what they call it, and finally, our guide negotiated these rooms in the VIP section. And, you know, they were the nicest rooms in the hotel, which essentially we had not totally paid for. So unfortunately, I only was in this very nice room one night, our last night in Cuba. And the sunrise came up the next morning and we came home. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Don. Let's see. I don't know if anyone wrote questions on the chat.
So
Not.
exactly 9 o'clock. We timed it good, and I'd be
Yes.
happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Are there questions? Please, you can unmute yourselves.
This is Paul, and actually, I don't have a question. I was on this trip with Don. It was wonderful. But I wanted to say that William Suarez, who was our local guide, left Cuba shortly after our tour, and he now has his own tour company, William Suarez Birding, and does tours throughout the Caribbean. So he was great, and so if you wanted to go birding with a good guide who knows Caribbean, I would recommend him.
All right. Okay.
Thank
In
you.
Cuba or just all of the Caribbean?
I know he does Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Lesser Antilles. I don't know if he's able to get to Cuba or not. Because he left, there might be some sensitivities there.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's
I
a
think
great
if you leave, you can't go back for a decade. That's what Arturo told us. When Arturo came to the Smithsonian, he also had an ichthyologist came with him, and that ichthyologist defected. And Arturo said even if he wanted to, he couldn't defect because he had his 9-year-old son at home and he wouldn't be able to go back for a decade.
Also, didn't he have some money?
I suppose he has family there too, doesn't he?
Arturo, well, or this guy, Suarez, I don't know.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think he did, but I'm not sure. I don't know the details.
Okay.
Don,
Yeah.
it's Mike Callahan, and I wondered, is this one of your most memorable trips? And also, Evelyn, thank you for letting me sit in on the meeting to see my professor.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, one thing I haven't said is that the trip was really successful. We saw all except 2 of the endemic species. We missed, of course, the Zapata rail. We knew that would happen. And out in the Guantanamo province is the only place, I think it's the only place where the Cuban crow occurs, and we did not go into that area. But in all, we saw 153 species in 2 weeks. Yeah, it was good. Plus all these other things that we saw. So if it ever opens up, or if you ever manage to get there, I highly recommend it. You'll be well treated and friendly people. Oh, I mentioned about the food. You know, with this embargo, you think you don't get anything, but in the rest area, not only was there Coca-Cola, but I bought a Hershey bar, which surprised me. But one night we were in a lodge or a hotel and ordered chicken, and they came with this chicken leg that was as big as any rooster I've ever seen. And I don't know. And the chickens out on the countryside are scrawny little things, really not good at all. And so I asked the guide, I said, where did this chicken come from? Virginia. So there's some trade, but it isn't what it could be. So.
Any butterflies?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of butterflies. They're so hard to photograph. I have some pictures that I didn't show of some butterflies, but they're not anything special. Any other things?
Any other questions?
Dawn, is that a rare swallowtail that's just at like on Key Largo in Florida? Is that in Cuba? Because I remember when we were in Cuba, they pointed out a rare swallowtail butterfly, but I don't remember which species it was. Chaucer swallowtail?
Well, it could be. I know that there's some what are called long wings, butterflies with long wings that make it up to Florida. There's something called a Diana butterfly that is fairly regularly in Florida.
Well, this is a regular swallowtail, black with yellow spots.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to check it out. And things like mosquitoes were not bad, even at those lagoons, which was a pleasure, but kind of a surprising. And didn't see any snakes. Of course, snakes are out at night. We weren't out much at night. Anyway, everything was basically very pleasant.
Great. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
For
Thank you to you.
Okay. All right. See you all.
Thank you very much. And I will now, hi Kurt, I will now stop the recording and then end the meeting. So everyone, see you next month.